Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome back. And in today's video, I want to talk to you about inflation. I'm sure inflation has been on everybody's mind these days since the pandemic. Consider how much it has negatively affected people's lives. Um, and it's a tough thing to watch your money erode and especially your hard savings evaporate little by little due to inflation. And so in today's video, I want to talk to you how uh, what is inflation and what you can do to protect your savings. And I came across this very good article. It did a good job summarizing the the actions that we should take. But here, I just want to elaborate further as we go through this article. So let's get started. Here's how inflation erodes your savings and what you can do to stop it. Right? So inflation, it wears away your buying power, meaning that with the same amount of money, you cannot afford the same amount of things. You will need more. You will need more money to buy the same amount of products. That's what inflation does to people, and especially during the last few years because of the pandemic. Uh, Inflation has been on everybody's mind and impacting everybody's lives, whether you are rich or poor. And people are just sick and tired of the high prices of everything, and even the fast food has become a lot more expensive than it used to be. Just think about this. Fast food is supposed to be cheap. It's what most poor people eat to feed themselves. And nowadays, even fast food are um, are becoming so expensive that poor people can't even afford to to eat fast food, and that's how bad things have gotten so far. And as of March 2024, the U.S. inflation rate was at 3.5% for the previous 12 months. It had cooled down from a high of 9 to 10% in 2022, but is still way above the Federal Reserve target rate, which is at 2%. And yeah, here it goes through uh, a very basic definition uh, on how to calculate inflation. So inflation measures the price increase of goods and services over a set period of time, usually a year. And inflation is measured by dividing the change in the price of a product or service by the starting price and then multiplying the number by 100. Here is the formula. For example, um, let's take a carton of eggs as an example. Let's assume eggs cost $4 now, but it was $3.50 a year ago. So you can calculate the inflation by doing this. First of all, uh, take 4 and minus it by $3.50. You get 50 cents, which is the price increase over the last year. And you divide 50 cents by $3.50, which was the original price, the price from a year ago. You times that result by 100, and you get 14.3%. And that is your inflation rate, 14.3%. And of course, inflation can happen to anything, not just eggs. And economists, they measure the rate of inflation through the thing called CPI, which stands for Consumer Price Index, which includes commodities such as housing, food, transportation, household supplies, healthcare, all the daily necessary stuff that people need to survive. And yeah, we all know that inflation negatively affects your purchasing power. Um, for example, if you need to spend $100 to buy the grocery and inflation is at 15%, so after a year, you will have to spend $115 to buy the same amount of goods. Inflation negatively affects everybody's savings. Um, if you put your money in a bank in the form of savings, you have to spend more of your savings to cover your basic needs, and you will have less money to save since you are getting paid the same amount. Inflation also erodes the value of your savings over time. If you keep money in a traditional savings account or in cash, it will lose purchasing power over time. If the interest you get from your savings is below the rate of inflation, we can take an example of short-term savings account in the U.S., which usually pays less than 1% in most banks, and you compare to the average inflation rate, which is at 5%. So you are pretty much losing money over time by putting your money in a savings account in a bank. So you have to think of other ways to protect your savings, so it doesn't become nothing over time, where one day you wake up and you can't pretty much afford anything with your savings. And when inflation is high, your savings need to earn a higher rate than the rate of inflation in order to not lose money. How to protect your savings from inflation? There are a couple of ways to do that, and the first one is also the safest one, which is to choose a high yield savings account. Most banks have very low yield savings account, but there are also banks out there that pay a very high interest rate for their savings account. And you should do your research and figure out which banks are safe and that you are comfortable to put your money in. A couple example is that Capital One has a high yield savings account, and I believe it's paying around 4.2% right now. Ally Banks, I believe, also offers a high yield savings account. There are some of them out there, so you can do your research and figure out which one is the best option for you. And the second option is to put your money in CDs. CDs stand for certificates of deposit, which is a form of long-term savings investment. So instead of putting in a savings account where you can put money in and take money out at any time you want, a CD is a fixed term deposit of your money. So if you put $10,000 in the form of a CD for 3 years, that CD is going to earn you interest every month, but you cannot take the principal out of the CD within these 3 years without paying a penalty. So this is the type of investment that you should make if you don't foresee yourself using this money for a long time. Because if you take money earlier than the term, you'll have to pay a penalty, and it's not worth it. Trust me. Um, One advantage of this type of investment is that CDs generally pay higher interest rate than short-term savings account. So now the federal funds rate is around 5%, and you can get roughly around the um, same interest rate on CDs, which is around 5% for like 2 years or 3 years term, which is very good. You don't get those interest. You don't get the same amount of interest from a savings account. The savings account is generally lower than CDs. But the benefit of a savings account is that you can take your money and out anytime you want without any penalty, almost like a checking account. And the third method mentioned in this article is build an emergency fund. Yeah, so it says that because interest rate high, it's more expensive to borrow money, of course. So it's more beneficial to have an emergency savings fund. So when an emergency happens and you need to use money, you don't need to turn to the banks to borrow and pay a hefty interest rate. You can just tap into your own emergency fund to cover those expenses, so you can avoid paying high interest rate, which yeah, definitely makes sense, but it kind of overlaps with having a savings account, because in my opinion you should just use the savings account as your emergency fund, and you put whatever money that you don't use into the savings account. You can take money out at any time you want, so even if there's an emergency, you can use the money from the savings account to cover it, no problem. Okay, the last option it mentioned in this article is invest. Of course, most obvious option out there. Yeah, because your money loses value in a bank account over time. Consider how low the interest most banks pay you. It's more beneficial to put your money into use and invest them into in places where it's gonna generate you higher returns than the inflation rate, so you don't have to lose money over time. This can enable you to continue building wealth during inflationary periods, as long as whatever products you invest in gives you a higher return than the inflation rate, whether that's real estate, stocks, or even crypto, you know. But investing is a very difficult game. You could very well lose money. So it's not a guaranteed return. Definitely not as safe as putting your money in a savings account or CDs. So this is definitely something to think about, because the higher the reward, the higher the risk. That's always true. And you could lose a lot of money by investing in the wrong thing, basically. And last but not the least, mentions one last thing, which is to check your spending. Of course, if you cannot make more money, then the only thing you have, the only option you have left is to spend less money. As your money can only buy you less and less products, in order to, spend the same amount of money, you will get less products in return. And inevitably, you will have to cut your budget or keep your budget the same. But unfortunately, because of inflation, the same amount of money is not going to buy you the same amount of products, just so you know. So you'll have to tone down your lifestyle and buy less stuff that you do not need at that moment. Basically, reduce your gratification and delay your gratification, pretty much. And yeah, so this is all that information that the article has touched upon with some of my personal thoughts. I hope you find this information useful. And yeah, I know it sucks that inflation is very high and everybody is feeling it, but there are ways that you can do to mitigate the negative effect uh, as much as possible. And if you find this video helpful, please like and leave comments down below. I will see you in my next video.